Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the DLF Trade Show on the DLF YouTube channel. Russ and Addison are here, and I am dizzy. I am confused. I am still trying to figure out what running back is on what team, because I think literally all of them changed teams. All of them.
Every single one, yes.
Every single running back. That guy that was on your team, he's not there anymore. That guy that was on that team, he's on your team now.
Yep.
That's what happened.
Unless you're the Cowboys, then you don't have anybody.
Unless you're the Cowboys, then you got no one, dude. You just lost anyway. Yeah, they made a statement. I don't know what it was. It was a very quiet and silent statement, but it was a statement.
Mm-hmm. It was. Braylon Allen, baby.
Probably, yeah. Mm-hmm. But we are here, and we are going to talk about players that moved in free agency, because that's the big deal right now, right? We had the combine, that's over. This is what we have until the draft happens, which is only like a month away, right? Like, it's not far. I think it's in the 20s of April. 25th.
Yeah, it's like a month and a half. Yeah. Our days are going on right now.
Than I wanted it to be, but okay. I was hoping 4 weeks, but it's closer to 6. Way to just bring me down.
Sorry.
Way to bring reality down on top of me. But let's jump in. And I haven't looked to see who we're talking about, but for 2 reasons, it's obvious that we're talking about Saquon Barkley. One, because it's us, and we have any close of a reason to talk about Saquon Barkley. We're talking about Saquon Barkley, but also he went to the Eagles and got a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Christian McCaffrey isn't fair. He doesn't count. So when I say Saquon Barkley has the RB1 upside, it's RB1 except for Christian McCaffrey, because I feel like he just doesn't count anymore. So but I think Saquon Barkley on the Eagles has the RB1 upside.
Agreed.
So the first trade we have, 12-team, 1 quarterback. Saquon Barkley and Marquise Brown, free agent who hasn't signed yet, I believe. Man, he's choosing the right place. That's what I'm holding.
Patrick Mahomes restructured his contract. They freed up $21 million. I'm not saying I'm connecting the pieces there, Russ, but
I mean, it's either that piece or this piece, which would make me very happy in that red. But okay, let's talk about the trade. Saquon Barkley and Marquise Brown for the 101. Now, there isn't real conversation here. In a super flex 101, there's conversation. In a 1 QB 101, it's Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yep.
And while I love Saquon Barkley, he's nowhere close to the value of the 101. And while we love Hollywood Brown, he does not bridge that gap.
Unfortunately, yes. Unless he's on the Chiefs, then that would be really fun. But it still would not bridge the gap.
Not at all.
No, it would not. This is kind of what I was hoping would happen for Saquon Barkley's value, with that it would rise a lot to the point to, unfortunately, because I love him, but I think it makes him a dynasty sell, because he is a 27-year-old running back. Running backs get hurt just by the nature of the position, let alone a running back who has dealt with injuries in recent history. It's become a point now with Saquon where we've gotten to a value spike that it really doesn't make sense to hold on to him. Not even if you're selling him for Marvin Harrison Jr., but just if you're able to sell him for like a top 7 or 8 wide receiver. Like, this could be Puka or Garrett Wilson or AJ Brown, his now current teammate. It could be, honestly, even Tyreek Hill might make me consider, that it kind of gets into their similar ages when you factor in running back versus wide receiver ages in their career arcs. But I think we've gotten to this point now with Saquon where he is kind of on the sell side.
I pulled up February ADP, and Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver 8, 12th overall. Saquon Barkley, running back 10, 36th overall. Now, of course, ADP does not at all equate to trade value, but I just wanted to show the gap that's in there. Like, that's a gap. So this next one is a whole lot more interesting and relevant to prior conversations when talking about Saquon Barkley. Still 12-team, one quarterback, Saquon Barkley, and DK Metcalf for Christian McCaffrey. Saquon Barkley, 407, DK Metcalf, 390 for a total of 797, Christian McCaffrey, 608. So we are overpaying the 2-for-1 to get the better asset. And I guess the question then becomes your feelings on DK Metcalf in that new offense with Tyler Lockett getting restructured and extended or re-signed, however you want to think about it. I think he was just technically re-signed. So does DK Metcalf bridge the gap to Christian McCaffrey? Yeah. Like my assumption now being DK Metcalf. Now, if this is like a start 9, start 10 league, DK Metcalf is an every week starter for you, in which case you are like DK Metcalf is most likely better than your lowest starter, in which case you are filling 2 spots. So assuming that the 2 of their combined scores will outscore Christian McCaffrey, and then you get a 26-year-old peak physical condition wide receiver on what should hopefully be a more pass-friendly offense. Like, do I seek out this trade if I have Christian McCaffrey? Probably not, because like I said, if I have Christian McCaffrey, I'm just keeping that. Like, that's Christian McCaffrey. But right now, if you think Saquon Barkley's that RB2 and it's only going to be by a couple of points per game, like I'm talking as long as it's not Travis Kelce being 12 points per game ahead of the tight end 2 a couple of years ago, like if there's like a 4 points per game difference, it's a huge win to add DK Metcalf off that, because Saquon and McCaffrey are the same age. And with both of them missing time, they've probably played the same amount of games. Like, I mean, Christian McCaffrey, well, they both missed like 2 full seasons at this point put together. But like, to me, that doesn't worry me whatsoever. It just goes back to their 27-year-old running backs, and you're turning that into a very well-producing 27-year-old running back and DK Metcalf. Like, I think that's a good trade. I like the idea of it. I like the players. Like, usually we like the theory, but not the practice. I think this is right. I don't know if I have the guts to do it.
And I think what you mentioned here that is making it kind of work a little bit on both sides is the fact that DK Metcalf's value seems to have suppressed back down because of Tyler Lockett staying. Like, the assumption was that Lockett was going to get cut and it's just going to be Metcalf and JSN. But Lockett being thrown in there, like, they can't support all 3 of them consistently every single week. So if Metcalf falls back down to the back end wide receiver 2 that he has been, that's more or less replaceable by a lot of different wide receivers, especially on any given week. And so if you're able to just add that kind of a player and replace Metcalf's production with, a Michael Pittman or a Rashee Rice that emerged on the year last year, or if you have another first round pick like Malik Neighbors or a Rome Odunze coming in, that might make Metcalf a little bit more expendable. But I see this on the other side, to where if I have Christian McCaffrey, this is something that I really, really want to do, because you're moving from one elite running back to another elite running back. Now, they've kind of have various degrees of eliteness because it's Christian McCaffrey. But, more or less, we are looking at 2 bona fide top 10 running backs, potentially even 2 top 5 running backs. Like you said at the beginning, Saquon has the ceiling of being the RB1 overall, essentially, in the Philadelphia Eagles offense, scoring double-digit touchdowns, catching another 50-plus passes, totaling 1,500 yards. That's well within the range of possibilities. And then you get to add on who I think a solid wide receiver 2 in DK Metcalf, who is going to have those spike weeks. So I see this beautifully from the Christian McCaffrey side. And from the other side, I don't mind it. That's not something that I want to do to move up at the running back position.
So next we have the savior. We have the man that we are placing our hopes and dreams of Drake London and Kyle Pitts in. We have quarterback extraordinaire Kirk Cousins. Now, we have to... Now, I'm not going to talk about Cousins for a second. I want to talk about Pitts and London, because the second Arthur Smith got fired, we did a show about the bump in value Pitts and London should get, because it couldn't get worse from where it was. Mm-hmm. So just make sure when you're valuing these players, you're not fully working this in again. We knew they would get a different coach. We knew they would get a quarterback that was better than Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke. Now, Kirk Cousins could be better than what we thought. So yeah, you can still bump a little bit, but don't go crazy. Like, Pitts is not tight end 1. London is not a top 6 wide receiver. They might be in a year, but like now you pump your brakes a little bit. So Kirk Cousins, very good. Next best landing spot that I could think of off the top of my head. So his value probably just holds, but it's an exciting thing to trade for him now. So let's see what happened involving Kirk Cousins. Big boy, 12-team super flex. Jordan Love, Kirk Cousins, Amari Cooper, and George Kittle for Josh Allen. The elusive 4-for-1. Jordan Love, 604. Kirk Cousins, 277. Amari Cooper, 204. George Kittle, 178 for a total of 1263. Josh Allen by himself, 998. So yeah, overpaying, 4-for-1. You are buying, like, I mean, if you're starting 9-10 players, you're almost buying half of a starting lineup right now. And I definitely don't do this if I have Josh Allen. I'm putting this out there.
Yes.
I understand, even if you have a bad team and you have Josh Allen and you want to break him down into other pieces, these are good pieces. Or at least maybe this person just values Jordan Love higher than I do. And I'm not even talking like analyzer value. I just think fantasy output, points per game wise, like this might, or just really finish, not the actual points. Like, he finished as a top 10 quarterback. I don't know how often that really happens and decisively happens, especially now they bring in Josh Jacobs, and that means they have a running game, which they did not have last year.
Hey, Aaron Jones was good for 1 or 2 games.
1 and 3 quarters, but it is what it is. Mm-hmm. So again, like, this is one of those in theory, but not in this practice, where if it was Jordan Love, Kirk Cousins, and one young wide receiver worth about 350 points instead of Cooper and Kittle, where it's a little more team building and not just buying old production. Not to mention, I'm starting to get very worried about George Kittle. I would like it more if that were the case. But on the flip side, the fact that you were able to send a trade like this where Kirk Cousins probably held a lot more value than the analyzer is showing, that sounds like a win. To be able to pull this quarters for $1, and maybe one of them's a 50-cent coin. Like, Jordan Love deserves that at least, but so you're paying $1.25 for $1. That's kind of what you're doing with the analyzer values. Like, I think this is good for the value picture of Kirk Cousins. I just don't get it from the Josh Allen side.
Yeah. I didn't include the package adjustment on this one, but if you did include the package adjustment, it knocks the Love and Cousins side down to 1,100. So it roughly just negates the value of George Kittle.
I was expecting a little more, to be honest, since it was 4-for-1, but yeah, that's rough.
Yeah. So it makes it basically a very even trade with a difference of about 100 analyzer points, which is like a third basically. And yeah, I agree with you. If you have Josh Allen, this is not the way that I want to move him. I want a little bit more security at the quarterback position. I know Jordan Love just had a monster season. I still don't feel secure about him unless he was your QB2, which I'm assuming if you're trading away Josh Allen, you might not have a better quarterback than Jordan Love, especially if you've included Kirk Cousins in that to kind of do a 1-for-2 at the quarterback position.
Yeah.
Amari, solid piece. Kittle, I agree with you. I'm kind of getting out on pretty quickly. It just is not the way that I want to run my dynasty roster. You put it perfectly that I would rather have one Josh Allen and then figure out my wide receiver 2 spot and my tight end 1 spot and maybe my QB 2 spot in Superflex than trade Josh Allen for a whole lot of this. The
next trade is a little more low key, at least. It is Nico Collins and Kirk Cousins for Trevor Lawrence. Nico Collins, a very respectable 336. Kirk Cousins, 277 for Trevor Lawrence, for a total of 614 for Trevor Lawrence, who's at 630 by himself. I can see this trade if you're one of those people that don't believe Trevor Lawrence is not even elite. Like if you don't think he's in that second tier, like if you don't think he's at the bottom of that Herbert Burrow tier, like that mid end, like the end of the first round in startups, like if you put Trevor Lawrence in the middle of the second, I understand this trade more. I am not that. I do believe in Trevor Lawrence, and I stick with like a couple of bounces and toes that in a different direction last season. He puts up a bunch of extra touchdowns, and his stats look very, very different. So I really do like Trevor Lawrence. And Gabe Davis, well, not really anything for fantasy, is good for that offense because they didn't have a field stretcher. They had three of the same guy. And now they can wait until that deal with Atlanta goes through. They give them a third, and then they can sign Calvin Ridley back. So Calvin and Kirk can work underneath while Davis takes the top off, and it'll be a much more effective offense. My sales pitch for Trevor Lawrence done. I like both sides of this, honestly. If you have Trevor Lawrence, you don't believe in him, you're buying the production in a solid quarterback, but you're getting that youth, you're getting that young wide receiver. And if you're, I mean, even if you like, when you're rebuilding, you want to rebuild around young wide receivers, but in a super flex league, you'd rather build around young quarterbacks. So if you believe in Trevor Lawrence, I think this is a great deal to go get Trevor Lawrence, because in the long run, unless Nico works himself up into that top like 8 or 9 wide receiver range, production wise, it gets to be a little easier replaceable, down the road. So in like a year and a half, 2 years, when you're like, all right, I'm ready to go, let's go, you'll be able to pull an Amari Cooper who will probably score the same amount of points as Nico Collins, as opposed to having that cornerstone of your team in Trevor Lawrence.
I fully agree with you on this one, that if you believe in Trevor Lawrence, this is a fantastic deal because, I mean, like you said, Nico Collins is, unless he does reach that peak top 10 fantasy and dynasty value, like you mentioned, I mean, not as of right now, he's in a massive conglomerate of a whole bunch of other wide receivers in terms of very similar value and production, like Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf is in there, DJ Moore, Devonta Smith, his teammate Tank Dell, Drake London, has probably risen above Nico Collins because of Kirk Cousins coming to town. Michael Pittman is in there. Rashee Rice is in there. Odunze and Neighbors are going to get thrown into there. I mean, it's like there's so many other wide receivers that you can go and target for Nico Collins without the expense of Trevor Lawrence. And not to mention, like you said as well, too, like if his production is replaceable, then you can get that production from a Mike Evans or an Amari Cooper or a Keenan Allen or anything like that. So I fully agree that this is a great deal to go get Trevor Lawrence. If you don't believe in Trevor Lawrence, it's also a great deal to sell him because Kirk could probably outscore Trevor Lawrence for the next 2 or 3 years in Atlanta. And then you get Nico Collins. So yeah,
it's a good trade. Let's move down to the Tennessee Titan himself, Tony Pollard. Now, I was a little surprised about this, but then I talked to a Titans fan, and he said he said something that made a lot of sense. Last year, it was pretty obvious what was going down. Derrick Henry was on the field. He's running the ball. Tyjae Spears was on the field. You're going to throw him the ball. Like it was pretty much televised what they were about to do. Tony Pollard is in many ways pretty similar. Well, strike that, reverse that. Tyjae Spears is in many ways pretty similar to Tony Pollard, in which case this now does what they want. They're not telegraphing anything, what they're going to be doing on the field. Like I made the comment that this reminds me of like Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams when they were originally drafted. Like they weren't on for specific reasons. They were just on for different drives. Like, they kept legs fresh, and they were both good enough at running and receiving that you never knew what they were going to do just because one of them was on the field. So this is good for the offense. So I think it's, if you were hoping Tony Pollard or Tyjae Spears were going to be a workhorse, sorry. Which, I mean, that's a little on you. But I think it's a good landing spot for both of them because I think they'll both probably get close to a 50% share at this point.
The one thing I want to add to this, and this is the argument for Tony Pollard. that he could still have a workhorse ability in Tennessee. And as a Tony Pollard stan, I've been trying to find this argument. I found it. I don't know how good it is, but
doesn't matter. If you like it, let's use it.
There's a new offensive coaching staff coming into Tennessee, right? It's Brian Callahan coming in from Cincinnati. They hired Nick Holes from Jacksonville. He was the passing game assistant in Jacksonville last year. So he's their offensive coordinator. They did not draft Tyjae Spears, but they did sign Tony Pollard. And if you look at both of their coaching histories, Brian Callahan, for the past 4 or 5 years in Cincinnati, has used Joe Mixon as a workhorse. Joe Mixon has never been worse than a top 10 fantasy point per game running back since 2020. I think is what that last year. So 4 years in a row, Joe Mixon has been a top 10 point per game fantasy running back as a workhorse in Cincy under Brian Callahan. If you look at Nick Holes, his history a little bit. So he's coming from Jacksonville last year. He was the passing game coordinator, but he at least saw a workhorse running back in Travis Etienne and understood the utilization that he had in their passing game as well too.
Yeah.
And prior to Jacksonville last year was the offensive coordinator at UNLV in 2022. That offense utilized a complete workhorse. They had one running back that had over 250 touches. No other running backs had more than 50 touches in that UNLV offense. So that is the argument that Tony Pollard is coming in here to be the workhorse, and Tyjae Spears then becomes a Chase Brown kind of player.
That is more compelling than anything I would have made up. So I think that works. I love it.
There's your Tony Pollard. That he is this is like the Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet thing, right? Where we thought they would maybe be more of a 50-50 split. And then Walker just ended up being the full bell cow still. Like, this could be a good move for Tony Pollard as he's still a workhorse and Tyjae Spears is the one that's dead. Or maybe they cannibalize each other and they're both dead. I don't know. But as a Pollard fan, I'm hoping it's still Pollard.
Well, let's talk about Tennessee Titan workhorse running back Tony Pollard right now.
Let's do it.
In a 12-team Superflex, Tony Pollard was traded for the 209, a 25-second, and Luke Musgrave. Luke Musgrave is like the most popular throw into a trade that I've seen in like forever. And it's not like in one league. In like I can't say how many times I get a trade offer. It's like this, and Luke Musgrave. Why? Where? What? Like, it could be, it's just like, just, I got this Luke Musgrave for you. Please take him off my roster. Please. I don't want it.
Like, he's just compelling enough to maybe make you pull the trigger, but just bad enough that you don't mind losing him in the deal if he gets the deal done.
It doesn't really, So this comes in total of the package. I mean, I think we're past the point of a first for Tony Pollard.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 2 seconds. The 209 is too late for me to want to do this again. Like, this is valuing Luke Musgrave in this trade for this to be even. Like, there's a gap to be bridged for the 209 and a 25-second for Tony Pollard for me. Like, this needs to probably get closer to like the 203, 204 for me to want to do it. Like, it would need to be decently earlier, especially with one of them being 25. If it was like the 204 and 206, I would feel better about it. If it was the 202 and 207, like, the earlier one gets, the later the other can get. But I would send this to get Pollard if I cared about setting lineups in March and wanted a running back.
Yeah, I agree with you, because if you read this as this was that person who had the 209's 25-second, that's potentially another playoff second next year, 1 year from now. And if Tony Pollard does do well enough that he is a contributor to that potential playoff team, then you're helping them make that second be later, this is definitely, it is a weird deal. I agree with you. The weird deal to do now, I think, to like go out and like try to buy a running back like Tony Pollard, but this could also be a solid deal that if you do believe that Pollard is going to do well in Tennessee and you want to try to buy low on him now before people, start to analyze and say, well, Pollard's actually going to be good, and use the argument that I just used for pro Tony Pollard. I think I would take Tony Pollard in this. The 2 seconds in Luke Musgrave, I agree, is just not compelling enough for me to sell him for that. And I would be willing to buy Tony Pollard for this right now.
And that's assuming you could fill the massive hole at tight end you have by losing Luke Musgrave.
Yes.
Next trade. Next trade, we have the 105, Javonte Williams and Tony Pollard for the 101. Wow. 105 in at 438. Javonte Williams 207, Tony Pollard 187 for a total of 831. The 101 at 755. So we did break that value. We did get to a higher value on the package side for the better piece, not by nearly enough. And I can't imagine doing this with running backs. So this is another one of those practice theory versus practice things where I get it. Paying up from the 105 to get to the 101, or really like trading down from the 101, like you don't need a quarterback and you don't care between Harrison Jr. and Neighbors. So you're like, cool, give me whoever gets left over there at the 105. And then it's those running backs that are just stopping me from being like, yeah, that's cool. Trade back. Let's do this. I love the idea of Javonte Williams, and I know we should have written off last season with his health. It didn't really help my feelings on that with how much he played. Like, he didn't play great, but he was on the field a lot, which I was surprised by. But I do think he will be better. He will be healthier going into next year. But that still doesn't change what his value is and how high I think it can go. And again, this is pretty much requiring Tony Pollard to be that workhorse production-wise for this to equal out for me, because I get that it's pretty much same tier, the 101 and the 105, but that's a big fall.
Yeah. It really is relying on the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors are not that far apart, which I have made that argument for, and I still believe to this day that Neighbors is 99% Marvin Harrison Jr. But landing spots could really throw that thing off. Like if Marvin Harrison goes to Arizona, peak landing spot, and Neighbors then goes to Tennessee, at 7, like, did you really, is that really the landing spot you wanted for Neighbors there? Or, same kind of situation that you do with the quarterbacks, if you're trading down, you didn't care about Caleb Williams and you're perfectly fine getting Daniels or Drake May, I understand that too, but I don't think Jaden Daniels is going to be there at 105, and Drake May is probably going to end up being a commander, and adding Javonte and Pollard, just it doesn't feel like enough. It's enough value wise, but you're compiling the value, and I'd rather just have like one good piece, and I probably don't want that piece to be a running back, like you just said. So like 380 points. Like if we go back up, like Nico Collins was 335 points in that Trevor Lawrence trade that we just talked about.
Nico Collins, I can see bridging that gap for people.
It's very much a difference between like two good assets and then just like one really solid, and especially a player like Nico, a 24-year-old wide receiver, that makes your roster look and feel better, I think.
Yeah, and again, to give an ADP perspective, the 105, the fifth. We have Superflex ADP on DLF also. The 105, the fifth drafted rookie was Drake May at 34th overall. The first drafted rookie was Caleb Williams at 12th overall. So we're talking almost 2 full rounds in a draft. So like that's and up top, right? Because Caleb Williams is the 112, so he's technically a first round pick. So that you have to bridge the gap of the second and third round. So it needs to be strong.
Yeah, in a startup sense, that deal would get rejected every single day.
And our last player we're going to talk about is not free agent, but traded Joe Mixon. And I mean, I was losing out on my Joe Mixon belief. He's 27, going to be 28. He looked slow last year. And I know that Bengals team wasn't the Bengals really. But then he goes to Houston, and Houston's offense, even before CJ Stroud, was good enough to make plotters like Damian Pierce and Devin Singletary look fantasy valuable. So Joe Mixon not being very expensive anymore anyway, I love this. Like, my assumption is you're sending a mid-second to go get Joe Mixon, and you will get that back in production. Like, that value will come back pretty easily to you.
Yep. I mean, he not like situationally, nothing changed for him. He went from a starting running back in a good offense to being a starting running back in a good offense, and he is a short-term asset regardless. So nothing changed for Joe Mixon. And I didn't include Aaron Jones in this. We didn't talk about Aaron Jones during the free agency preview, but I feel like Aaron Jones is kind of in the same boat as Mixon. Their values, I think, are pretty interchangeable because same thing. He went from being a starting running back in a good offense, and Minnesota's offense isn't really good without Kirk Cousins, but starting running back to starting running back, short-term value. I feel like you could just swap out Aaron Jones for these trades and it'll be the exact same thing.
All right, but let's look to see what we have. 12-team Superflex. Joe Mixon and Zach Moss. That's ironic. Zach Moss going over to Cincinnati.
Replacement.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid that word. Joe Mixon and Zach Moss for Josh Downs. Joe Mixon 101, Zach Moss 22. That'll probably change a little bit with this news. Probably maybe not that much.
People hate Zach Moss.
He's going to be a running back that will be used in the Bengals. I'm sure they're bringing in somebody else, but still, he did well. He did more than well enough in Indianapolis when Taylor was hurt. Mm-hmm. But Joe Mixon, Zach Moss together, a total of 123. Josh Downs by himself, 154. I like this trade because it's taking two older running backs that you probably don't want on your team anymore and reinvesting in a young wide receiver. Josh Downs had some good times last season, and that was with the uncertainty, or not really uncertainty, but the back and forth at quarterback in the beginning with Richardson getting hurt and coming back and getting hurt again. But nothing really changed. Richardson's going to come back. Pittman got his deal. He's there again. I get a little worried thinking that they're bringing in Brock Bowers, which every mock draft has them taking. But still, Downs is a much more down the field guy than Bowers would be a worry for also. But I love the move of this, especially in March, turning two aging running backs that aren't scoring you points because it's March and getting it in a young wide receiver.
I do like it from that point of view, but I also like it from the other point of view that if Josh Downs was your late second, early third round rookie pick last year, wide receiver 6 or 7 on your team. And, not to say you need an RB2, but you wanted some extra depth at running back instead of some extra depth at wide receiver. I think this trade makes sense from going from Downs over to Mixon and Zach Moss. So this feels almost perfect, I think, from both sides.
Yeah, very fair enough. You're turning Joe Mixon, who will be an RB2, and then you have the possibility of another RB2 on your team, or who knows what Zach Moss could be if they only do just roll him out. Joe Mixon was pretty much a workhorse for most of the season. What if they do just roll Zach Moss out? He can be a low-end RB1 at that point, just based on volume and situation. So, and that's someone who might not fully pan out as a fantasy viable wide receiver. So, yeah, you're right. It is good in both directions.
Yeah.
Last trade. Interesting. A lot of it. Okay. This trade needs to calm down a little bit. So, Baker Mayfield and Joe Mixon for George Pickens and Kenny Pickett. I'm yeah. Aw. You had to have Kenny Pickett in that trade. So, Baker Mayfield in at 143, Joe Mixon 101, total of 245. George Pickens 266, Kenny Pickett 55, total of 322. So Pickens, the most valuable player in here. I think I agree with that. Even after Baker gets re-signed, I think we were all just working on the assumption that was happening anyway. And it's good for Baker that Evans got re-signed, which I think we're all a little surprised by. It felt like Evans was moving on, but good for him for hanging around. And good for the team in general. I like this again. I'm just going to pretend Kenny Pickett's not in this trade.
He makes that side look worse.
Yeah.
It could have been Luke Musgrave, and I would be more into it.
Hey, who's worth more? So, like, again, very similar to the last trade where you're turning two guys who are going to score points, don't hold a ton of dynasty value, and turning him into a young wide receiver. George Pickens, 23, I think should pair very well with Russ Wilson. I still believe in Russ Wilson. I don't think he's like the elite guy who won a Super Bowl anymore, but he's still a very good quarterback. And while that offense might not be prolific in any way, Russ Wilson, if anything, is efficient. So I think this should be good for Pickens. So I like this idea. I think we're joking, but I want something better than Kenny Pickett, even though the value in the analyzer is still on the Pickens side. Like, this is buying into the Pickens hype already in my mind.
Yeah, I think I would do this trade to go get George Pickens on the possibility, you know, like we really crap on Arthur Smith, but you know, it wasn't that long ago when he was making AJ Brown look really good as an offensive coordinator. Maybe he's just one of those coaches that sucks as a head coach and needed to just be an OC. You know, we've seen a bunch of those types of guys, offense and defense, you know, that operate that way or need to operate that way in the NFL. So I'm not saying George Pickens is AJ Brown, but we've at least seen solid wide receiver production to borderline elite wide receiver production from wide receivers in an Arthur Smith offense. And if he's really the only wide receiver on the team, I mean, we were talking about it before, like it's Pickens and Calvin Austin. Apparently they have Denzel Mims on the team. I don't know when that happened. I mean, I'm sure they're going to draft somebody. The Steelers seem to draft somebody in the second round every single year. Maybe they draft someone in the first round this year in a really good class. So it's not just going to be George Pickens, but I think I am buying into the hype a little bit that I think he is worth more than Baker Mayfield and Joe Mixon together, because Baker, even though he was on the season QB 11, he was QB 18, I think, in fantasy points per game. So he wasn't really all that dissimilar from Matthew Stafford and Geno Smith. And actually, you know, Russell Wilson outproduced Baker Mayfield on a fantasy point per game level last year. Jared Goff also outproduced Baker Mayfield, and all these guys feel like very similar quarterbacks, very similar values. So I would take George Pickens here. And then if you need to replace Baker Mayfield, I would target one of those guys that I just mentioned and try and see if you can get him for a cheaper price without using George Pickens.
Oh, we can't move on. That was our last trade. Before we leave, we are remembering this time. We have some open teams in our Watchers League, and we've had them for about 3 weeks now, and we have never remembered. So our Watcher League is on myfantasyleague.com. It is a 24-team, 2-copy league. So pretty much two 12 teams put together. So lots of, you know, if there's a guy you like and that one guy doesn't want to trade him away, there's another person you can go get them from. Otherwise, it's 12 teams, super flex, PPR, tight end premium-esque, you know, pretty vanilla league put together because we want to entice some trades. So either comment on the video or DM one of us. Let us know if you're interested, and we'll shoot you over some ideas, maybe, of what's on there. Like, you know, maybe we'll let you know what the players because there's going to be a dispersal. Maybe we'll let you know what the players are. Maybe, if we're nice enough. I'm not sure.
There's some good players. It's 2 copies, so there's good players on all those teams.
So yeah, so let us know if you're interested. Would love to get that filled and dispersed as quickly as possible so we can get some real, you know, get some action going back on. But on that note, thank you for watching the DLF Trade Show on the DLF YouTube channel. Russ Fisher, Dynasty Outhouse, Addison Hayes, @AmazeHayes_. We'll catch you next time.